I know the way I'm going to be describing this film will make me sound like a schizophrenic man rambling on about a nightmare he had, but I swear to God this movie is real. I rented it as a kid, I've seen it multiple times, I even own the gosh darn DVD for Pete's sake. So yes, it's real, it's really awesome, and it's Tokyo Gore Police. Tokyo Gore Police is a Japanese film from 2008 directed by Yoshihiro Nishimura, and it, with The Machine Gun Girl, is responsible for the genre of J-splatter kind of exploding on the North American scene, creating a gold rush for distributors to bring out the next big J-splatter film onto the North American shores. And just like when I talk about any other movies that I really love and I really want people to see, I won't go into too many details. Due to the graphic nature of this film, I obviously won't be able to show you a lot on YouTube, so if you want to see this video uncensored, head out to my Patreon. The film starts with a narration, and we hear the voice of a little girl describing her police officer father. She tells us that he's great with helping his community, he's like a superhero, and then his head explodes. And that scene sets the tone for what this movie will be. Then we cut to a dystopian future Tokyo where the police has been privatized, which yes, that sounds like a great idea. Imagine that ending well, kind of like if you'd, I don't know, privatized prisons. Oh wait.
Go get him!
And that's where we meet our main character, Ruka, played by the leading lady in Audition, and she's just as great in this, although it's a very different role. She, just like her father, joined the police force, who is now owned privately, and she even became the #1 engineer hunter. But what is an engineer, you might ask? Well, it's these mutated psychopaths that basically grow out weapons out of areas where they hurt themselves. For example, our first villain is this man who had his arm cut off and he grew a chainsaw, thus making him the original Chainsaw Man. Anyways, when Ruka's colleagues can't really deal with him, they call her to the scene, and that's where we see this movie's amazing action choreography. It's also there that we realize that this movie will be bloody, if the title wasn't a sign enough, because the arterial sprays in this are chef's kiss. Basically the traditional samurai film blood sprays, but cranked up to 1,000. After she deals with the engineer, we get the backstory on the engineer, and we learn that all of them have this key-sized or key-shaped tumor in them, which leads Ruka to investigate a bunch of prostitute murders that were apparently done by engineers. In the meanwhile, we also learn that Ruka is trying to find who killed her father to avenge him. So one day she's dressed up as a prostitute, not really, more like a geisha, and sent on her merry way to try to find the man behind the engineers. Which she will do. We quickly learn who the man behind this world domination plan is, and it's Pinky and the Brain. Well, minus Pinky, more like the Brain, because we see that the man behind the engineers is actually an engineer himself, but instead of a face, he has a brain, and instead of eyes, he has just tubes. Just tubes. The man looks like a Ninja Turtles villain. In fact, all of the villains in this look like Ninja Turtle villains, except if you made it rated R.
He's still alive after losing half his head.
So yeah, she meets the engineer, he puts a key in her, but she has a bit more of a delayed reaction. During that time, the film remembers its reputation and shows us a bunch of crazy shit. One of the copper goes to a love motel that's also an auction for human trafficking, and he meets a lady without a top. But her breasts, instead of having nipples, have these like stitches, but with like alligator teeth. You'll understand why later, and he goes into a room with her for some sexy time, but it's not the sexy time he expects, as she rips off his penis and her brain man comes out of nowhere. And that's where we see one of the most iconic scenes of this film, other than, you know, the limbless lady walking on her stumps, but that's also for later on in the film. The alligator legs slash vagina lady. Basically, she's an engineer that gets ripped in half and grows an alligator mouth instead of her legs, and when it opens, it kind of looks like a alligator cooter. Please, YouTube, don't demonetize me. And of course, our copper dude fights off the alligator lady. Then he returns, and that's where we see the police going completely nuts and starting to just murder random people. For what reason? They're cops. I don't know, man. That's also when Ruka has a face-to-face meeting with Brain Dude, and Brain Dude tells us the entire backstory of Ruka's father's murder. Basically, Ruka's father was a dirty union leader, and he didn't want the police to be privatized, which of course didn't sit well with the leader of the company, who basically used Brain's father as a tool to murder Ruka's father. Brain's father was quite the sniper back in the days, but he got shot and he didn't get any compensation for his accident, which made him very angry. During that time, he had a son who was a bioengineer who really worked on important stuff. So one day, the CEO of the private police gave him a bunch of money, enough to take him out of poverty, only to ask him to murder Ruka's father, which he accepted. But this was also a setup, because not only did Ruka's father die, but Brain's dad also got killed by the chief of police. This sent Brain into a frenzy while he was working on a project about serial killer DNA, which led him to inject a bunch of serial killer DNA inside of him, which transformed him into the original engineer. If that sounds confusing and silly, it's because it is.
Kill anyone that resists! Severe lockdown!
After his story, Ruka just kills him. And she goes on a revenge arc. It's so funny that he goes on this long diatribe about, conspiracies, and she's just like, yep, slices him in half. I love this movie. After that happens, well, Ruka knows the truth and she's on her revenge arc, and this is where the film basically turns into a video game boss fight. Ruka goes to the building where the chief of police is, and she has to fight his henchmen one by one. The first one being the weird scientist hunchback man with a hand bazooka? Like a bazooka that shoots hands. This movie is really goofy. She has no problem, then she moves on to the next fight, which is the limbless lady that now, instead of walking on stumps, walks on katana blades. And this is another iconic scene from this film. If you're not even familiar with this movie, you might have seen this scene, because it's just as absurd and honestly as awesome as it sounds. Once again, the special effects are super well made, and even though there were some CGI scenes in this particular sequence, it doesn't really show it. It's this perfect blend of CGI and just well-made practical effects that is honestly lacking in a lot of films today. Honestly, I could just rewatch the sequence over and over again and never get tired of it. Eventually, she destroys the quadruple amputee. Not too sure about that one. Leading her to the final boss, which is the chief of police, and of course he's very upset about, his daughter betraying him. Also, I forgot to mention kind of an important thing, at this point she's fully in engineer mode, and she has an alligator arm and a robotic eye. I told you I wasn't gonna go into too many details, I just kind of forgot things. And that's pretty much where I'll leave it. Of course, you kind of know the end. She's gonna fight off the final boss, and I didn't go into details because I want people to see this. I've skipped over so many things because trust me people, if you haven't seen this movie, you should. So, what did I think of Tokyo Gore Police? I love it. It's one movie that I wouldn't say is one of my favorites. I think it has some issues. The pacing is a bit off at times, and a lot of this film feels like just scenes thrown in for the sake of absurd, weird things going on. It's really weird, but does it really have to be this weird? Like, there's a lot of things I glossed over that were like, oh, fake ads about how self-death is not as cool as just, you know, cutting. Like, it is very goofy. There is a sequence where a bunch of kids just get massacred. Like, it's a lot to take in. At a hour 50 running time, like, it's a lot to take in. There is so much things going on, but to me, the main kind of storyline is worth watching the film for. Again, the special effects are amazing. There was not really any big CGI, which was a thing that the films that were inspired by this, like The Machine Girl and the awful ones like Robo Geisha and Lust of the Dead, kind of forgot about, and they instead replaced all the effects with terrible CGI. But this film has a lot of production value in it. The acting, the characters are also very strong. Of course, Ruka is played by one of the best Japanese actors of the era. She's doing this really good role. This film is not really sexually charged, well, at least not our main character. It's kind of a throwback to Pinky Violence, where yes, the main character was this attractive woman, but it was more about the action and the character than the character's sexuality. Overall, it's a great movie. I'd highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. I doubt it, because this movie blew up in 2008, 2010, and that basically everybody talking about WTF Japan movies were talking about this one. See you guys next time.